Good morning, Burada. This is the meeting of the Gwent Police and Crime Panel, which has been held at the Council Chamber in Usk on Friday the 29th of March. Before we start, could we ask everyone to identify themselves, just in case there's people watching never seen us before? Okay.
Sian Curley, Commissioner's Chief Executive.
Jeff Cuthbert, Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
Larry Thomas, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
Morning, Julian Williams, Chief Constable for Gwent.
Good morning, Deputy Chief Constable Pam Kelly from Gwent Police.
Good morning, Simeon Rossatrocus, DS for Cybercrime for Gwent Police.
County Councillor Peter Clark from Monmouthshire.
Jill Howells, Independent Member and Vice Chair.
Catherine Forbes-Thompson, Lead Officer to the panel.
Councillor John Guy, Newport City Council.
Councillor Lisa Winner, Blind Gwent Council.
Councillor Stuart Ely, Blind Gwent Council.
Councillor Jason Jordan, Newport City Council.
Councillor Emma Rapier, Torvine County Borough Council.
Councillor Mike Jeremiah, Torvine Borough Council.
Councillor Jez Kirby, Caerphilly County Borough Council.
Borodar, Colin Mann, Caerphilly County Borough.
Borodar, Councillor Tony Easton, Monmouthshire County Council.
Thank you very much for that. If we now move on to the agenda, first of all, the first item on the agenda, any declarations of interest other than that's already been declared at other meetings? No. Item 2, apologies for absence. Apologies for absence, please.
We have apologies from Councillor Christine Forehead and Independent Member Peter Nuttall.
And could I give apologies? If I could give apologies for Darren Garwood, who unfortunately has an emergency dental appointment this morning.
We have our sympathy with that, really. Okay, if we now move on to item 3, to approve and sign the following minutes. Gwent Police and Crime Panel held on the 25th of January 2019. That's pages 5 to 18.
Chair. Chair.
Sorry, page 1 to 4.
Chair.
Okay.
The Monmouthshire contingent was here last time. Councillor Clark and myself were not in the minutes as being present.
Okay, we note that. First, so that's covered in the page 1. Page 2, just quickly going down through it. The last time we covered attendance management position. We had a presentation by the Wellbeing Officer. Rostering, that was on page 2. Page 3, we had a long, detailed discussion on the precept, which the panel decided and agreed as to 6.99% increase. That was on page 4. Everyone happy with the minutes? And
one point on accuracy. On page 4, the indented paragraph resolved that the reasons, the word precept is a 4 in the middle, and that's just a typo.
Right. Yeah. Could I say well spotted on that? And just quickly going through any other matters arising on the minutes, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. And can we have a show of hands that we agree to the minutes, please? Okay, thank you. We now move on to the item 4, which is the cyber crime presentation. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay, firstly? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Simeon Rossatrocus. I'm the Detective Sergeant for Gwent Police's dedicated cybercrime unit. Before I continue, just tell you a little bit about myself. I've been with Gwent Police for about 18 months in order to set up and manage the newly instituted cybercrime unit. I transferred from the National Crime Agency, where my most recent background was in covert online investigation, particularly around child protection. So I've been given a challenging brief today to give you 10 to 15 minutes or so discussing cybercrime. This is a complex and wide-ranging subject, and what I hope to do is put it into some context for you, both at the national level and then drilling down into the local level, the issues being faced by the communities of Gwent, and give you some specific examples. I've tried not to make it too technical, but if there's anything you'd like explained, please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have, and I'll leave some space for some questions at the end before I hand over to the Deputy Chief Constable. Okay, so as the title slide says, I'm going to try and put you in the picture regarding cybercrime. And the first thing I'd like to do is play you a short video that perhaps explains the breadth of some of the challenges we're facing in policing.
A new report by the National Cybersecurity Centre at National Crime Agency delivers one clear message. In our new connected world, everyone is a potential target. From the 5.7 million businesses across the UK, FTSE 100 companies to one-man bands. From Britain's banks and utilities to the military, the public sector, and on into Parliament. With our growing dependence on digital communication and smart technology, the UK is increasingly exposed to the threat of global cybercrime. 12th of May 2017, WannaCry, one self-replicating worm connected with 300,000 computers in 150 countries. Data was encrypted, and the cyber gangs demanded a ransom of $300. The true cost for business is far higher. Huge disruption, financial losses, reputational damage. Over a third of all trusts were disrupted. 6,900 appointments were cancelled. Data is now a valuable target. Uber paid hackers $100,000 to destroy the names, phone numbers, and email addresses stolen from 50 million customer accounts. And a data attack at Molenbeek created an expected loss of more than 350 million euros. But the threat is not confined to major corporates. Small businesses across the UK are now vulnerable links, used by cyber gangs to reach larger targets higher up the chain. By the end of 2018, the Internet of Things will be made up of 11 billion connected devices around the world. Social media is unregulated, and only 40% of the data stored in the cloud is access secure. Cyber criminals are exploiting these vulnerable digital highways. Between October 2016 and the end of 2017, millions of cyber attacks were launched around the world, and we will see more of these threats in the year ahead, all intending to cause more real-world harm here in the UK.
Okay, that short video is produced by our National Lead for Cybersecurity Matters, the National Cybersecurity Centre. And what I've hoped that has given you is an overview of some of the issues that we face. But what I'm sure you're actually more interested in is how do we deal with these issues on a more local policing level. So the way that cyber crimes are defined by UK policing is that we split them into two categories, those being cyber-dependent crimes and cyber-enabled crimes. Now, both of these crime types are undoubtedly something that affect your constituents. The first one I'd like to talk about is cyber-dependent crime, and those are specifically targeting a computer to unlawfully access its content, impair its operation, and people who do this commit an offence under the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. Now, this might sound a little bit technical and difficult to relate to, but it could be an example where someone's designed a code to hack into someone's personal computer and they've stolen some sensitive data, or they simply want to prevent that person or that business having use of their computer. Or even more simply, it could be an individual's Facebook account that's being hacked. Cyber-enabled crimes are very simply perhaps existing crimes, but are just those facilitated by a computer. So Perhaps someone's received an email and it pretends to be from a supplier to a business, stating that you need to make a payment to a new bank account, and in reality that bank account belongs to a fraudster. It is as simple as that. That is the modern day way that most fraud is implemented. Or something that we've seen quite commonly in Gwent are spam and phishing emails, which have content that might suggest that a person's been looking at something perhaps they shouldn't have online, and they are now demanding $1,000 in Bitcoin. That can sound quite scary, can't it? People don't really know how to respond to that. Even if they know they've done nothing wrong, it generates that sort of nervousness and worry, and that's something that we need to tackle. That straightforwardly is a blackmail, and what we advise around that is to simply report it firstly, but once it's reported we can help you through that. I'd like to drill down a little bit more specifically, into how some of these issues are affecting Gwent. Unfortunately, this hasn't zoomed in too tightly, so I'll just try and talk you through it. So for the period between April of 2018 and September of 2018, our data shows that a total of £56,000 was lost to individuals in Gwent, and £24,000 of that is perhaps a direct loss to a person or an individual rather than a business. Another key figure to pick out would be that 11% of the crimes reported to us were in respect of businesses. That figure to me seems very low. I can't believe that only 11% of our reports are in fact from businesses, and I also can't believe that the loss to people and businesses in Gwent only totals £56,000. The scale of cybercrime is huge, and I think the problem with these figures is it is massively, massively underreported. And one of the key messages I'd like you to take away, both for yourselves, your friends, your family and your constituents, following today's short presentation, is to please, please, please report it. Even if you don't think it's worth reporting, I assure you that it absolutely is, and nationally and locally we'll work together to make sure that we're responding more effectively to cybercrime. So how do we deal with it as a force within Gwent? Well, the PCC's Police and Crime Plan has rightly identified that cybercrime in its entirety, so that's enabled and dependent, is an absolute priority for Gwent Police. And how do we deliver on this priority for the Police and Crime Commissioner? We follow the national structure laid out for cybercrime, which is to break it down into what we call the 4 Ps, and those are prepare, prevent, protect and pursue. By themselves, those sound a little bit strategic, and they might not mean a great deal to yourself, so what I hope to do now is break them down into some practical examples. Firstly, prepare. Preparing our staff and improving our response to cybercrime through training and increasing resources. Prevent. Stopping children and young people crossing the line into cybercrime, and we do so in partnership with Tarion in the region and the National Crime Agency on a UK level. Protect. Providing help, advice, guidance to our communities to stop them becoming victims of cybercrime. This is a really key one for us. We're not going to be able to arrest our way out of the problem of cybercrime. It is going to be far more effective to inform and educate all of our communities about the simple practical steps that they can take to stop themselves becoming a victim. And pursue. Of course, there will be those cases that are of a sufficient seriousness that we absolutely will be pursuing them as a criminal investigation, and I'll be sharing a success around one of those investigations shortly. So as the slide title suggests there, no really, how do we deal with these issues? So let's see. Prepare. In the last year, Gwent Police has invested heavily in upskilling both frontline officers and the specialist cybercrime unit that I manage. And that's to help us deal more effectively with both cyber-dependent crime, which is principally dealt with by our frontline officers, and the more complex, cyber-dependent crime being dealt with by myself and my unit in the specialist unit, and the cyber-enabled crimes being dealt with principally by our frontline officers. This has allowed Gwent Police to substantially increase our effectiveness, and I'd like to basically outline my unit, which is myself, 2 dedicated cybercrime investigators, a community support officer, and we're soon to be joined by a cyber protect officer. The last 2 really helping us to focus on stopping people becoming victims in the first place. Prevent. Prevent initiative is a model that's been carried across from counter-terrorism in the UK and is now being successfully implemented when dealing with cybercrime. The idea behind it is to prevent children and young people becoming involved in cybercriminality and putting them onto a positive action pathway where they can really use all of these complex skills that they've developed in a positive way for a future career. So a particular case within Gwent is one from Caerphilly County that I dealt with myself. This was where 2 14-year-old boys had gained unauthorised access to multiple parts of their school's computer network and the copied material. Myself and other officers investigated in cooperation with the school and found that these boys had indeed committed Computer Misuse Act offences. But my question to the school, my question to you would be, is it really in the children's best interest to pursue a criminal prosecution at the age of 14? My personal opinion is no. And working in partnership with both the school and our colleagues with Tarion, we agreed that we wouldn't criminalise the children, and we've actually enrolled them on a nationally recognised diversion pathway that will give them access to workshops and open days and insets with companies in the tech sector so that they can develop their skills in a safe and constructive way that will allow them to pursue a career in IT perhaps, rather than ruin their prospects at such a young age. Continue on to protect. I'd like to think that perhaps some of you are familiar with the work of our community support officer, Natalie Evans. I've popped a Twitter hashtag in there at GPCyberCSO, if any of you are Twitterers and would like to follow. Natalie does a really brilliant job of providing cybersecurity advice and guidance to all of our communities in Gwent, and she does so via social media, but also perhaps more importantly in this role, she does so by engaging at regular events in schools, clubs, businesses, public events. She's got a great breadth of knowledge that she can share, either on a one-to-one basis or providing talks and workshops for people in your communities. This includes absolutely everything from protecting your small business to perhaps parental concerns of keeping your children safe online, or even something simple like setting up your Amazon Alexa. Another case study I'd like to give you is around Pursue. This is an investigation that we dealt with. I was made aware that a business had been locked out of their cloud storage. A lot of businesses now don't store any of their business data locally. And when they found out that they were locked out of their systems, this is potentially devastating. They couldn't conduct their business and they were in a real panic as to what to do. Following being locked out, they subsequently received a demand in Bitcoin from an anonymous email, and the proviso being that if they paid up the Bitcoin, they'd have control of their accounts restored back to them. To cut a long story short, whilst of course we helped them with advice and guidance and not to pay this ransom, the more important success around this was that we were able to identify the perpetrator who had committed this crime against them, and they were arrested and being prosecuted. We were able to retrieve the encryption key for the business and restore access to them, and in the end they suffered no financial or commercial loss. A key question for yourselves is going to be, how is this work that we're doing paid for, and are we really delivering on the return on this investment? So in common with other forces across England and Wales, we've secured some additional Home Office funding that specifically supports the staffing of cybercrime for the unit and the training that they receive. The funding is secured for 2021 and is also being match funded by Gwent Police. So I think it's important to emphasise that it's not just Home Office money that's funding our work, it's also the money that we're receiving directly from the policing preset. This is a threat that isn't going to go away, and we absolutely do need to continue this funding for this ever-expanding area. So what are we doing in return for all this funding that we're being provided? Well, we've actually got some pretty ambitious targets that we look to deliver to. And the first of those is that 100% of the referrals that we receive, both internally and nationally from Action Fraud, will be investigated, and 100% of victims who come to us will get some advice in person or at minimum over the telephone to prevent them becoming victims again in the future. We implemented the rollout of this model in November of last year, and to date in that period we're achieving 94.5% of our referrals receiving that investigative response, and the same 94.45% receiving that important protect advice. Obviously we strive towards the 100%, and where we haven't quite achieved that is because unfortunately some people, once they've reported something, don't want any further engagement. They might have perhaps reported it for an insurance purpose of something like that. So I mentioned Action Fraud there, and just briefly I'd like to explain what that is. In short, Action Fraud is the reporting mechanism for reporting cybercrime in the UK, and it's run by one of our colleagues at City of London Police and on behalf of all of the UK. We would of course still encourage you and your constituents to report directly to Gwent Police, depending on the nature and the severity of the incident they're suffering, and we will of course allocate the appropriate resources. However, even if they report directly to us, there's still a requirement to report to Action Fraud. Action Fraud's role is to collate the national intelligence picture around fraud and cybercrime, and they use this information to task police forces and provide them with other relevant information in order that they can investigate these matters properly. For example, is a victim in Gwent an isolated case? It could be an isolated case, or it could be that it fits a pattern that's going on across the region, across Wales, or perhaps across the UK. It's absolutely vital that we receive this national intelligence information so we can really effectively investigate these matters and get all the information we need to pursue appropriate investigative leads. I've just popped the graphic up for you there of the different ways that you can contact Action Fraud. Over the phone, via the web, and I think the most important one there is if there's a crime in action, that they are a 24/7 resource. So if a business finds out that they're locked out at 3 in the morning, there will be someone there to talk them through that and then can provide that information to us at the earliest opportunity to do something about it. Some other links and contacts that I'd like to give you. Obviously, the Gwent Police website has recently been refreshed and updated. There is some excellent advice on there for both yourselves and your constituents that's been produced in partnership with Get Safe Online, who are a national organisation as well. The Cyber CSO, Natalie Evans, if you want to get in contact with her, share anything with her, or perhaps arrange a talk for your constituents, your community groups, your family, your friends, your school, please do so. And then obviously ourselves directly at the cybercrime unit should you wish to contact us. Just a couple more points quickly around advice and guidance, and some other excellent resources available for you at cyberaware.gov.uk online, all nationally accredited. Take 5 to stop fraud, again, nationally accredited, and the lead agency, the National Cyber Security Centre. So I'd like to thank you for your time, and are there any questions for me before I hand over to the Deputy Chief Constable?
Yes, thank you very much. That's there's a lot of detail there, really, and some I'm aware of, and there's a lot I'm not aware of. One question I would ask of you is that banks are very much involved in financial institutions. In the past, I don't think they've taken it, well, at the beginning, they didn't, in my opinion, didn't seem to take it all that seriously, or they tended, you know, sort of brush things away. Are they sort of more focused because it's all part of a sort of a jigsaw? They seem to figure in an awful lot of this, don't they, really?
Absolutely. You rightly point out it is a jigsaw. This isn't something we can deal with in isolation. We do get information and intelligence from our partners in the banking industry around trends nationally and locally, as well as more specific intelligence. A good example of this would be, I can recall an occasion where I've had an instance of a business has lost a substantial amount of money, and that was transferred out of their account the day previous and onto a suspect bank account. In partnership with our financial crime unit, we were able to freeze those funds in the suspect bank account and have those restored to the business. The reason we were successful in doing that is because we received that report so early, and we were able to work in partnership with the financial crime unit and the banking industry to make sure those funds were frozen quickly.
Thanks very much for that. Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. You said that you felt that things would be massively underreported, and I think we'd all understand that. On the other hand, there's a fairly small team. Maybe this question should be directed further up the tree, I'm not sure. But obviously, if the reporting did become more realistic, do we have the resources to cope?
Obviously, the Deputy Chief will have her thoughts about that, but what I would say is Gwent Police have invested heavily in upskilling our frontline officers, as well as us in our specialist unit. So essentially, the vision is that my unit will continue to deal with the most serious and complex of matters, and frontline officers will become increasingly skilled and adept at dealing with the more day-to-day matters as reporting increases, and they've always got the support and guidance from us in that specialist unit to make sure if they do have queries and questions about how they can deal with it effectively, we're there to help and advise and make sure they can do that.
And if I may come in there, just around that, years ago, we wouldn't think about equipping frontline staff with cyber knowledge. The reality is now every officer in Gwent Police is trained to a certain level in cybercrime. I'm not saying they're specialist, but that awareness in terms of evidence gathering and signposting is certainly there. The reality is this area of the business is only going to grow, and we are going to need to invest in it further. But if I may just sort of sum up some of the other work that we're doing, and to complement the presentation that Simeon's given, Gwent Police is just one part of a national and international cog. With cybercrime, clearly we're talking about grooming of children online, fraud, but also serious organised crime. So as the All Wales lead for cybercrime, we've put in some bids to the Home Office, which has allowed us to increase resources to also investigate the dark web. Because what Simeon hasn't covered is that, of course, drug trafficking, firearms, people trafficking also takes place over a dark web. And it would be naive of us nationally to ignore that. So even though we're a small team, we're a part of a network across the UK. So we link in very closely with the region and with all of the other forces in Wales and in the UK. And to give you an example of what we're doing here in Wales, we link in really closely with Welsh Government, who've given us some funding to deal with some prevention work. And what that looks like is the local resilience forums that, as you know, respond to critical issues such as flooding or, you know, a major incident in our localities. they're also now seeing cyber as a part of their response. So if, for instance, a local authority or the health board or a significant business in Wales was cyber attacked, the local resilience forum kicks into action if it's a critical issue. So we've been working very closely so that our response is about reaction and prevention, as well as just actually investigation. To look at that further, as you know, some of you may know, we've had a cybercrime bus going around Wales, visiting 22 local authorities and giving advice. So the whole issue around cyber is that prevention is better than cure. Cyber will change, and the methods that offenders will use will change every single day. The answer has to be proactive investigation coupled with good prevention advice, which is why we're investing heavily in the Schools Liaison programme and, of course, working with businesses and local authorities across Wales. The business element is important because what we're trying to do is to ask Welsh Government to actually fund some of our smaller businesses who they may be supported in Wales to ensure that they are cyber safe. So at the moment, we've influenced all local authorities in Wales to actually have Cyber Essential Plus. And also, we want businesses in Wales and businesses who want to invest in Wales to have that cyber awareness so that we can keep Wales cyber safe. Ultimately, whereas previously we'd be looking at our physical streets, and the Commissioner and I have spoken about this, you'd have a burglar alarm in your home, you may have CCTV, you will lock your car and park it somewhere safely. The cyber world is our hidden streets, and we have to provide the same level of security for ourselves and our organisations in our hidden streets as we would in our physical streets. And the great work that the unit here is doing is certainly on the front foot here in Gwent.
Could I say, Chair, there was an event in Caerphilly County Borough about 3 or 4 weeks ago, which I think people did find useful. At least it's an awareness-raising thing, and making people aware is the first step in the right direction, isn't it? But back to the front line for a moment. Do the frontline officers have the information to hand on their handheld devices and so on to give advice on the spot to possible victims?
Essentially, all of our frontline officers have mobile phones, and they've got what we describe as a cyber toolkit, and this basically gives them, in a couple of clicks, the information they need to provide the correct response and evidence gathering tools that they need to make sure that those incidents are investigated properly. So yes, it absolutely is in the hands of our officers now.
Yes, thank you. Just very quickly, on the issue of the cyber bus that the Deputy Chief Constable referred to, that was in Chepstow and Ebbw Vale yesterday, and I visited the bus at Ebbw Vale Leisure Centre yesterday evening. Quite a lot of interest, I have to say, and it's very good in terms of helping people to understand the dangers, not to cause alarm, but to create a feeling of alertness about what to look for when they otherwise want to use the internet safely. And I was also present at the launch of the Soutarian, which is the regional organised crime unit for Southern Wales. And again, as the Deputy has said, there's money provided by the Welsh Government, so it's a joint exercise in terms of, well, protecting and preventing.
Tony.
Thank you, Chair. The international problem last year where lots of computers across the world were infected by a cyber attack shows that the cyber criminals are one step ahead of us most of the time. We've got to be chasing them. But back to the point of this business in Monmouthshire where the attack was from Essex. If it had been from Kazakhstan or Nigeria, you may not have had the same sort of success. But it brings back to me the point that there needs to be backup for all the information you've got. You need to back it up. If you lose it on one stream, you need to have your backup. Because if this had been abroad, you probably wouldn't have got the keys to get back into the system.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And there's certainly some specific challenges around the borderless nature of cybercrime. It isn't just in the UK, it is international. we will always strive, regardless of where the crime is actually being committed, to work with our regional, national, international partners. But yes, the importance of backups for small businesses and indeed everyone else really can't be understated.
Thank you for that. It was really interesting. How do you deal with people's expectations when they report cybercrime? So, for example, I a while ago had a bank transaction that was fraudulent. I admit I didn't report it. It was dealt with by the bank. I had the money back. So to me, actually, I experienced no loss. And it was only when I sort of became more involved in this, I realised that actually I should have reported it. I would have reported it with no expectation of support from Gwent Police, as in, I've reported it, it's there for your intelligence and information. However, a different individual may expect and not have the understanding of the way in which the crime happened and expect more support. How do you deal with that? Because in terms of what you deal with, that's actually probably quite a minor issue, for want of a better word, compared to some of the other cybercrime you deal with.
Okay, you raised some very good points around some of the challenges we face there. I mentioned briefly in my presentation that our target is to provide support to 100% of the people who report to us, either directly or via action fraud. So perhaps in the past, yes, we weren't as good at delivering personal service and support to victims. However, now, particularly, I'm shortly to have a new member of my team join me in about a month or so's time. And my ambition with them is to actually get them out directly visiting victims who report these crimes to us. So, yes, certainly a challenge, but one I think we're in a good position to meet as time goes on.
I do think then you need to be careful about managing people's expectations because, you know, obviously as this progresses and it gets more and more successful, if you haven't got the resources to be able to deal with that, you know, to have the expectation somebody's going to come and give you a visit, it's quite, it's commendable, but is it really achievable?
Certainly, I agree there's some challenges around resourcing there. Obviously, the ideal would be the visit in person. The minimum standard would be some help and advice over the phone and point them in the direction of some good help and advice channels.
Great, thank you. One of the things that we've talked about on this panel quite regularly is about the impact of cybercrime. In the information that we've been provided on performance through many meetings, we have yet to actually see what form and what context it is. If cybercrime is part of all the other categories of crime that you're reporting, how as a panel are we going to understand the impact of that crime, and how as the Commissioner do you understand how that level of crime is increasing and in which categories?
Yes, I mean, I'll let the Deputy Chief Constable comment on it from the operational side, and Joe Robinson may have a point to make on this, but you are right. It now cuts across, as has been outlined, all types of crime, whether from financial fraud through to the spreading of indecent images, and it will be a cross-cutting theme, which you will see in the new draft version of the police and crime plan that you have. And it will be an issue for us to see how we can lift out the aspects of particular types of crime to reflect the cyber element of it. So then that's work that's ongoing, but I'm quite confident that we can do it.
Okay, so do we actually know what is the extent of cybercrime at the moment then? If it's going to be such an issue going forward, how do we know it's such an issue? What evidence and what information do we have that we know? We all understand cybercrime is an issue. Probably everyone in the room has been affected by it, or they know somebody that's been affected by it. But how, as a Commissioner, do you know the extent of it and how we're going to change the direction of travel?
Well, in part, you've almost answered your own question. It is happening widely. We're getting more and more reports of it. It's not just an issue for Gwent. We have briefings from the National Crime Agency, which have been alluded to, and I'm certainly going to mention when I give my Police and Crime Commissioner's update on the extent of cybercrime across the UK, and it is growing. I can't give you a more precise answer than that at this time, other than we will be able to do so. I don't know if Joe Robinson would like to come in.
Sorry. I think just in terms of reassurance about how we understand it from the officer's perspective is in terms of for the new plan, obviously there will be an enhancement around cybercrime in it. So therefore, our understanding and the scrutiny and monitoring that we put in place will be around that. So the performance framework will have, and that will be a significant piece of work that needs to happen now with police colleagues to understand what would be the relevant indicators across all areas of the business that would help us to understand where cybercrime is happening, so that monitoring can take place. That piece of work is yet to happen. I think in terms of fully understanding it, it's going to be a challenge to ever fully understand it until we get that reporting right. So there will always be, I suppose the understanding will be that we don't understand it all, and what we will be striving to do is to build that picture, is to encourage people to report, so that in Gwent we do have more of that knowledge. What we know is that for almost every single crime committed, there will be a cyber element to it, and there is that possibility, but that is the operational side of things. The only other thing I wanted to mention was that in terms of reassurance around vulnerable victims, there is somebody around who, for the financial safeguarding element, which fits into cybercrime, any suspicious activity, including for the action fraud, where there is an element of vulnerability, that is screened by an individual person who's a financial abuse officer, and he will make contact with any victims who are vulnerable in Gwent at the moment. Obviously, that's all, if we expect it to increase, those kind of things will need to be looked at, but there is a significant amount of effort in putting support in place for vulnerable victims now. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Again, I'm going to reiterate my point. We're in a position where you're talking about the extent of cybercrime, but you're not able to tell a panel the extent of it and how it's changed, even in the last 2 years. You must have operational information. You must know where cybercrime is happening and in which categories it's happening. So to say that we're going to be developing measures and we're going to be developing ways in which we can find out how the crime is going forward in these areas, frankly, it's not acceptable. If it's that important to be in your cybercrime, if it's that important to be in your plan, that cybercrime is your biggest target, you should be able to say to a panel, cybercrime has increased by 10% over the last year, 15% over the last year, and our areas are within violence without injury because it's cybercrime, because it's bullying and harassment through Facebook. To say we're going to be developing that, I think is very disappointing.
Could I come in there?
Well,
That's okay.
yes, I regret the disappointment, but there's nothing I don't think that I can add at this point, but maybe the Deputy Chief Constable can.
I think your point is a valid one. Internally, operationally, we have a thematic look at bullying online, child abuse images. It's all linked to cyber, as well as the fraud, and of course, all of that is looked at thematically. Nationally, this has been a problem because, in essence, between 40 and 50% of crime has a cyber link to it. Even stalking and harassment, even though there's obviously the physical element, there's that online element as well. So we generally, almost half of our crime has a cyber link to it. How we then report that in terms of cyber crime is quite complex. We look at it in a thematic way through operational meetings. But what we will do, which I think is absolutely, we report this information nationally anyway, in terms of cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent crime. And we will put those reports into the performance report for the future. I've got responsibility for developing the action plan now in terms of core performance data and actually the thematic data, and cybercrime dependent and enabled will be a part of it.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yes, fair point, Ms. Hawes. We have brought to the panel, the Commissioner, myself has brought to the panel before, indicators in relation to peer-to-peer online abuse, which I think, Simeon, is cybercrime. I'll be correct in saying that, is cybercrime. They have been brought to the panel before. They have been scrutinised, and if you look at the report, an indicator of that at 1.45 is the MAPA offenders managed. And I have said personally before my vulnerability presentation that when we have peer-to-peer online offences, MAPA offenders go up, as can clearly seen as green. The struggle we have, to be honest, in answer to a couple of questions, we've always had a big difficulty in policing anyway, managing expectations. This will be a key one, and it will continue to go on, and we will fail in certain circumstances, no doubt about it. We haven't got a clear picture. we haven't got a clear picture nationally at all. Simeon produced some figures up there, and we're working extremely hard as a force and a region to get to the bottom of that. But yeah, you're dead right. We have not got the figures at the moment. There's a significant underreporting, and it will be a confidence issue as we move forward. But in relation to the sexual peer-to-peer, we have reported before.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the point where the cyber bus was in Ebbw Vale yesterday, who within the authority was aware that this bus was in Ebbw Vale?
Well, the authority was, and there was a representative of the authority present at the bus. I'll remember her title in a moment, but certainly Blaenau Gwent Borough Council was represented.
Because we within, as members, certainly weren't aware that this bus was in Ebbw Vale. And it is an embarrassing situation when we got constituents coming up to us and saying, why weren't you there? And we have to, tongue-in-cheek, say, well, we weren't aware of it.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that. I know that both the Welsh Government and Tarion informed the relevant local authorities because the site of the bus had to be agreed with each local authority. So, with respect, can I ask you to go back perhaps to your Chief Executive to say why weren't you as local councillors made aware of it? We wouldn't automatically inform individual councillors, we just inform the council, or in this case, Tarion, the regional organised crime unit.
If I could just clarify, I believe that all members received an email about it. Members?
In Caerphilly, they did,
yeah. I think we had one as well. Yeah. But obviously, if that's a communication problem, it's down to the local authorities, really, isn't it? Yeah. All right, sir. Yeah. Okay, Liza.
Hi, can I ask if we can have a copy of the slides, please? If it can be sent, electronically, say printing it out, because it's handy when we report back to our borough councils as well, that we've got all the correct information regarding presentation. And thank you for the presentation as well, it was good.
I think we've exhausted the questions on it. Can I say that that was a first-class presentation, really, and I would suggest you get that out to as many people as you can, really, because there's a lot of people, they don't realise the implications. They don't really realise what's going on. They might have an idea, but how you do that, I don't know. But there we are. Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Right, we now move on to item 5, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Update, November 2018-2019, pages 5 to 18.
Thank you very much, Chair. You have my printed update. I do not intend to go through that on the grounds that you will have read that, but I will, either myself or my colleagues will answer questions on what's written there. However, I do want to just update you on a few more recent activities that I think you'll be interested to hear about. One issue before I do that, Chair, though, this may seem a very mundane administrative matter, but it's about whether further consideration can be given to our seating arrangements. During this item, and most certainly during item 7, the actual performance report, I will be calling quite significantly on members of my team to respond to particular questions. And because this is live streamed and where we're sitting physically apart, it could look as if members of the public are just answering questions and not been identified with myself and my office. If we could possibly look at the way in which just before Christmas we sat at the Caerphilly chamber, it might give a better impression of a united team as opposed to rather being split up. But if I could leave that with the Secretariat, perhaps to discuss with Sean Curley whether that's practical in terms of live streaming and the configuration of the chamber. I'll just leave that with you. 2 weeks ago, of course, we all woke up to the terrible tragedy in Christchurch in New Zealand, where over 50 innocent people were killed by a far-right terrorist. and we were all deeply shocked. The reason I'm mentioning this now, Chair, is that the Chief Constable and I responded immediately. We had requests to attend the Islamic Resource Centre in Stowe Hill to come and give reassurance to members of the Islamic community whilst at prayer. And both the Chief Constable and I certainly went straight away and both spoke together with Councillor Bill Routley as the Mayor-elect of Newport. And we were thanked indeed for our presence and our messages of support. And as a result of further requests, I know that the Chief Constable organised extra patrols for mosques over weekends to provide that reassurance in the event of, or to prevent any further unpleasant events. Last week, I was at the offices of the National Crime Agency in London. Much of what's been talked about on the cyber side, I'm not going to repeat, but there was a heavy emphasis on the impact of cybercrime as part of serious and organised crime right across England and Wales, indeed the UK, in terms of the National Crime Agency. And there was very important sessions on human trafficking and modern slavery and the key issue of county lines, which is now blighting all of our communities, including us here in Gwent. That is the system where young people are very often used to traffic drugs on the promise of big money, very often becoming then exploited and in fact enslaved and trapped into that situation. These are key focuses for us, and that's one reason why you will find in terms of the new draft plan that's in front of you that it does talk about the impact of these things on our local communities. And there's more work to be done in that direction. That's not just an issue for Gwent, that's across police forces across England and Wales. We also had a meeting with Nick Hurd, the policing minister. This is the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners during the same few days, where he talked about the impact of serious and violent crime across England and Wales, particularly focusing on the Met, London, Greater Manchester, some of our larger police forces, and the extra money that he was providing for helping to tackle knife crime in these stages. At the moment, there's £80 million of, it's called new money, but all of this is difficult, whether it's actually new or being transferred from something else. But that there will be this money to tackle the issue in 7 police forces across England and Wales. That does not include Gwent and doesn't include most of them. And there is a view that they ought to think about redistributing that so that every police force in England and Wales gets something, even if the problem isn't as great as it is in some of those key areas. And he did undertake to go away and look at that a little further. Final point I want to make, and this was made at the National Crime Agency, and indeed will be made at the Senior Leadership Group for the Comprehensive Spending Review, which I sit on, is the impact of Brexit. And I know everybody is sick to death of the Brexit issues, but that doesn't detract from the great significance and importance that it has for policing and law enforcement. And the National Crime Agency made it very clear that whilst they are preparing for the worst possible scenario, that is crashing out without any deal, that they're trying to get ready to seek arrangements with police forces, law enforcement agencies in other parts of Europe to try and minimize the impact. Because if there is no deal and there are no arrangements in place, things like data sharing, the European arrest warrant will disappear, and we could become an attractive place for serious organized criminals even more to come and stay here, because extradition will be harder to enforce. So there are lots of things going on. In the case of Brexit, by 3 o'clock this afternoon, we might have some clarity as to whether a part of a deal, what's its meaningful vote, 2.5, whether that's achieved or not, we just don't know. If it's not achieved, then we go into further indicative votes discussions. I'm just making this point. It's not only about jobs, very important though those are. It is about law enforcement and policing as well, and it does impact upon us. I'll pause there, Chair, and myself and my team, we will take questions.
Certainly, you've given us a lot of thoughts to ponder on there. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. If I could go to 1.2, the last paragraph there. In January 2019, 668 reports of children abuse. Is that just for 1 month in January?
Oh, that's... yes, it is. Yes, it is. And that's relations to Operation Encompass, which I spoke at. And what that demonstrated is the extent of children who were involved in incidents of domestic abuse at their home. And the whole purpose of Operation Encompass is so that policing and schools can have better understanding of the impact on the education of a child and perhaps the behaviour of a child as a result of witnessing domestic abuse in their home. It's very much about awareness raising, but it does show the extent of the problem.
Right. My question relates to it's 1.3, page 5, and it's Early Intervention Youth Fund and the Serious Organised Crime, which are obviously very interrelated. I see that there's a lot of professional work being done there and sort of drawing it all together. But can I just say that the fact we got such, the serious crime and the county lines and all the rest of it, it's very important that these things continue and that you get as much support as you can on that, because a lot of these youngsters are getting drawn into these situations.
They certainly are. And could I ask, with your permission, Chair, my Deputy Larry Thomas to expand on that?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for drawing attention to this area of work. It's an area that we're very committed to working on, both in terms of implementing the UK government's serious and organised crime strategy, but also the serious violence strategy. We've been really fortunate to have a fantastic working relationship with Newport City Council in developing the intervention work in relation to serious and organised crime in the Newport area, and have developed a suite of interventions, from working with an organisation called Mutual Gain on developing capacity and awareness across communities, working with St Giles Trust and Crime Stoppers to raise awareness in schools with children of all ages, and that has had really successful feedback from teachers and head teachers across primary and secondary schools, and then working closely with Bernardo's in terms of developing a family support, family intervention model for those young people who are perhaps at risk of becoming involved in serious and organised crime, and then working with the St Giles Trust, working with the most challenging children who perhaps are repeatedly known to the Gwent police force, who are being perhaps arrested on a regular basis, but actually who we are trying to develop effective solutions of how we can collectively, working with the City Council and with local voluntary sector partners, to provide more effective support. And it's very early days in terms of that work, but some of the effective results are quite significant. For those representatives of other authorities, the serious and organised crime work is related to Newport, and it's related to the level of demand that Newport faces in terms of serious and organised crime and the evidence of serious and organised crime activity. However, we have been fortunate, and just to reassure all of our representatives from all local authority areas, that through the Early Intervention Fund, the 4 police forces through the 4 police ECs have received money from the Home Office to work on issues relating to serious violence and serious and organised crime across all of the Gwent authorities. And so we're going to be replicating a similar model, making them distinct, because obviously we don't want to duplicate the work in Newport, so there will be an opportunity to enhance some of that work, but very much working with Crime Stoppers, St Giles and Barnardo's across all 5 of the authorities, well, all 4 of the other authorities in particular, to make sure that we replicate that opportunity of raising awareness through our schools around the dangers of serious and organised crime, but also having access to resources through family support and through direct intervention through Barnardo's and St Giles to provide somewhere to go to support those families who perhaps are really struggling to help protect their children who are entering into really difficult and challenging areas of crime.
Can I just add, are you getting 100% support from all these other organisations? Are there any that are not pulling their weight on this? Or?
I have to say that the level of support from all organisations has been incredibly forthcoming. I really want to emphasise the partnership with all our local authorities in terms of both developing the serious and organised crime work and the serious violence work. That has been a true partnership element. And in fact, in Newport, we've been fortunate to, through St Giles, to deliver some partnership seminars and activities and workshops, and they have been so oversubscribed that we've had to put on an additional 2, and there's another one this week with Junior Smart, who's a former gang member, who's an ambassador for St Giles, speaking and helping us provide a really different way of looking at how perhaps all of us as organisations need to think about serious and organised crime. So the offer, I assume, of any additional support in marshalling our partners collectively is very welcomed. But again, it's a real example of how you all in your roles in your local authorities can help highlight the work and encourage your local authorities to further work with us on this challenging area of work.
Thanks. Stuart?
Chair, may I very quickly on this point, on the serious organised crime, it was remiss of me, I meant to say when I was talking about the National Crime Agency, Newport is one of 4 or 5 areas across England and Wales that was provided with extra money by the Home Office to look at projects and work on serious organised crime, and there will be an event to mark this and the work that's been done. It's in the Celtic Manor on the 9th of May. Now, I'm not sure whether the panel has been invited to that. We'll look into that, but it would seem sensible for me that the Welsh Government's going to be there, as well as representatives of the Home Office, Gwent Police and myself, obviously, and it would seem sensible that the panel is at least represented at that, but we'll look into that.
Okay, duly noted on that. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. Going on to 3.1, with the walkabouts, will local authorities be given prior notice to these walkabouts?
No, and I'm not being rude. I want to do it without notice. I don't even tell the police that I'm doing it, so that I'm just meeting people. Usually it's someone with me from my media side, so that people don't feel in any way encumbered that there's a police officer present or a council officer present. I can just talk to people and traders as I meet them and discuss the impact of policing and law enforcement for their business or for them as a citizen. It gives me valuable insight. I've had to constrain it a bit, because I think I mentioned at the last meeting I've got a trapped nerve still in my leg, and after about 6 minutes of walking I can't do any more, but as soon as that's passed I'll be reinstating it. But I'm looking to meet with members of the public by other means at the moment. But that's why it's not being cheeky or ignoring you, but I want to just meet people on the street as it is.
Thank you, Chair.
Regarding engagement, we in Blaen and Gwent used to have good engagement with the police and quite regular, round about once about every 6 months the police would come in to meet all councillors there and give us an update on what's going on. We haven't had that for a long time now, and the same with the PCC. We've never had you in. I know I brought this up quite a few years ago, and you said it's down to the leadership of Blaen and Gwent Council if they want you to come in to speak to all councillors. But I think it'd be good if we could have some engagement from you as a PCC to all members on what you're actually doing, and the same with the updates with Gwent Police, because used to be around about once every 6 months. The officers used to come in. I know we haven't had, I think it's for a few years.
Well, I'll obviously allow the chief or the deputy chief to deal with it from the policing side. I have been to councils, and I've met individual councillors, but I can't come if I'm not invited. Now, I know that's knocking it back, but let me assure you, if you want me to speak to a full council or to a committee of the council or just a group of councillors, I'm very happy to do that, subject to notice, obviously, and to diaries. But I've got absolutely no hesitation in making myself available wherever I'm invited.
Mike?
Chair, can I just... sorry, Mr. Jeremiah, can I just say one thing on that? Can I just say one thing on that point? It's just for everyone to know. I don't know if people are aware. It's, but we have communicated with all chief executives and leaders of the 5 councils. Back at the beginning of this year, we changed a bit of the operational structure within the force. We reinitiated chief superintendents in the west and east local policing areas. Mark Warrender is in your policing area as well, and we speak to him and get Mark up there. The offer's there to come and give regular briefings to the full council, and part of the rationale of bringing back a chief superintendent, which you probably, a lot of you in your time have seen before in the local policing areas, is to allow further engagement with the chief superintendent and a superintendent, both in Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly, Torfaen, Monmouthshire, and Newport as well. We have Mark Warrender in what we call the west, and Ian Roberts in the east, and they're supported by superintendent. So I can arrange that for that to happen pretty soon, if you're happy with that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just as a matter of interest, we get a regular senior police officer at every council in Newport. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, Mike, you...
Yeah. Can I just say that I'm very disappointed? Very disappointed with what you just said now about getting in contact with chief executive and things like that. I've been on the council 12 years now, and we used to have a regular superintendent or somebody there and give us what was happening in the police and answering questions. That hasn't happened for a very, very long time in Torfaen. I've been trying to get seminars. I think the last seminar that we got was Operation Crossword. Jigsaw, sorry, not crossword, Jigsaw, sorry. Operation Jigsaw, and that was the last one we had. I'm trying all the time to get seminars where we can have updates, where people can listen to what we are listening to here. I do give regular updates to my groups, but like I say, I'm very disappointed to hear that the council haven't responded.
Mr. Jeremiah, I don't know if I made myself clear there. I don't think the council haven't responded at all. All I've said is we've made communication, we're making the offer. I know you've got Phil O'Connell, who's an inspector. Phil with yourself was absolutely excellent, Phil. And again, Mark Warren that covers that area. So perhaps what we can do is ensure that Mark and Ian have contact with yourselves as well, if that's okay. If you're all comfortable with that as elected members and independents as well, and hopefully we'll get that and any briefings that are required. No problem. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. Could you go to 3.3, which is your police community fund? Since your inception as a PCC, how much money has been passed on to community groups? What criteria do you use to assess the particular group that's applying for money? And what sort of publicity do you give? I know I'm aware of your scheme, but I'm not sure whether all the community groups across Gwent are aware of it. So perhaps you could expand on that. Another question which I think Councillor Winter was going to raise was about Abergavenny. I'll come back to that in a minute. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We did give an update at the last meeting on the use of the fund. As you'll see in there, there's the latest update with the amount added. But with your permission, Chair, I'll ask my deputy to expand on it.
In terms of the question about the amount of allocation over the tenure of the Police and Crime Commissioners, tenure, the allocation of resources over that tenure, we'll have to respond back to you formally on that. I think we would need to make sure that we have the full information rather than try to respond to you now. But I think it is just worth reminding all members that we used to, there have been 2 grant award schemes that have been in place over the tenure. The first was the Partnership Fund, so we can again provide a comprehensive report on the outcomes of the Partnership Fund, including the total allocation of resources, and again have got that breakdown in relation to local authority areas and the types of community organisations that have been supported. As you're aware, and as has been reported to the Police and Crime Panel over the year, that the Partnership Fund came to an end at the end of last year, and we have over this year run a new fund called the Police and Crime Police's Community Fund, targeted specifically at work with children and young people to try and encourage and divert children and young people away from crime, antisocial behaviour and getting into trouble with the law. As you're aware, that fund is very much about developing the relationship between community organisations and the local neighbourhood policing teams, really wanting to build that relationship. This has been the first year, and our office has done a full review with the senior officers who've been involved in that, in the operation of that scheme, and has just reported that to the Police and Crime Commissioner with key areas of review and action for us next year. And again, we can report the allocations. As you will remember, the allocations are for a more substantive amount of money over a 1 to 3 year period, hoping that that will provide more effective and meaningful activity in communities. So I think that it's been a changing picture, one that we will report on, but I know that one of the outcomes that we've absolutely agreed for this next year is to increase the communication and publicity available to the general public and to yourselves about how to apply for the community schemes. So that's an area that we've identified that we haven't sufficiently communicated and shared information about the Police and Crime Community Fund, but we will do so, and that is already in action in train.
Can I come back on that, Chair? What does give you some sort of concern is the fact that you say in the report, in some of the most disadvantaged areas of Gwent. There are many areas in Gwent which may not be disadvantaged as such, but do have particular problems which might be lack of community facilities where they get dragged into drugs and antisocial behaviour. So it's not just disadvantaged areas. I know where the disadvantaged areas are, but there are some advantage areas where they need this sort of support as well. And it's the small groups of individuals who are doing a good job, keeping down the level of crime, I suppose, with the youngsters getting out of into misbehaviour, that we need to hone in as well. And they are important in our society.
Look, I understand that point absolutely. I know that there are areas within otherwise relatively affluent areas where there are problems. And whether they're spikes or they're more ingrained problems, that's a matter of opinion. Any organisation can apply. We obviously will look at any application, any serious business case against criteria, and we will certainly look to the advice of the local neighbourhood policing team to see what they have to say about it. And part of this is actually about improving the relationship between young people and the neighbourhood policing teams, so that the police are seen as friends as opposed to individuals who are out to catch them or to harass them. So it's multifaceted in that right. But let's not run away with it. It's only about £300,000, which may sound a large sum of money, but when you spread that across Gwent, it's not a huge amount. And the one problem with the Partnership Fund was it was a bit hit and miss. Any organisation could apply as long as they were within some very general criteria. And what we tended to find that it wasn't necessarily the organisations that are actually catering for the greatest need, but those who are best at making applications were getting the awards. Not to decry the work in any way, but I wanted it a little bit more targeted. We're not going to replace all the money that's been taken out of youth work. We know that, but perhaps we can set a good example and make a contribution on that. That's the reason for it.
Can I just come back in? Just to add, in relation to the types of activity that were funded through the Partnership Fund, many of you may be aware that the Police and Crime Commissioner actively supports and financially contributes to the High Sheriff Fund, and the awards that are made through the High Sheriff Fund, which are of a similar nature to the old Partnership Fund, which are a more low-level small grant scheme for lower-level activities, continues. So there is a significant investment, as well as through the Police and Community Fund and the Partnership Fund, through the High Sheriff's Fund.
Okay, can I raise the other thing about Abergavenny? To do with the reorganisation within Abergavenny in terms of the one-stop shop and the policing and the hub at, not the hubs, the police facility at the fire station. Councillor raised a question about this earlier, and I said I was part of the meeting that took place in Abergavenny where we assured the local members that we were driving things forward. Can you give us an update for the benefit of the members in Abergavenny where we are with that? Because there's been some disquiet about it actually getting off the ground properly. But that's all I can say.
I will ask the chief to comment on the operation on the operational side. The estates bit is mine. The old police station has gone as it's been sold, and that was linked with the law courts that were next door to it. And our intention then is to have a permanent facility. Currently it's a porter cabin, but it'll be a permanent facility within the fire station, but at the same time operating in the town centre from the one-stop shop next to the market, the entrance to the market. My understanding, I've been there, is that that has been fairly well received. I know there are issues in Abergavenny, and indeed I'm attending a public meeting, I think it's early May, with the Assembly member, Nick Ramsey, that he's called to talk about policing within Abergavenny town. But the plans are underway in terms of the spoken hub models for Abergavenny. But in terms of the operational side of it, I'll ask the chief to comment.
Yes, Mr. Easton, I know there has been some disquiet. There always is with reorganisation. Has Mr. Ian Roberts spoken to you, Chief Superintendent?
No.
I know he's been up there and spoken to a number of people.
I would suggest that maybe the local members ought to be more involved at that level.
Of course. And it has happened with some people. I know Ian's been up there speaking about what neighbourhood officers and response officers are there. So if you're happy, he'll arrange that contact to be made with you so you can answer the question directly. But we are concerned not to remove what was there before. Yes, there's a reorganisation with buildings, but in relation with dealing where our staff are, we are confident that they can deal with the issues, whatever they respond from. But we're very conscious of what you're talking about, the perception of where the officers, especially not only neighbourhood officers, but response officers are. So we're addressing that. I've spoken to Ian personally, and I'll get him to make contact with you, if that's okay.
Okay, just to come back on that, you mentioned the date you're going to meet with Mr. Ramsey from the Welsh Assembly. Will the local members in that area be invited as well? I don't particularly need to be involved directly, but I think the local members of Abergavenny Town or the Town Council need to be fully aware and involved.
I'm not sure if that's for me, because the meeting's been called by Nick Ramsey and he's invited me to come along to it. So I certainly can speak to him to see if his office has extended the invitation. I imagine that he would have, but it's not my meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, just to come back, Councillor Eason, in terms of our oversight of the changes in Abergavenny, just to reinforce for the Chief Constable that Chief Superintendent Ian Roberts does provide us with regular updates, and it's an area of work that we've got real good oversight on at the moment, because we do understand the level of local concern.
Okay, thank you.
I also was going to be bringing up regarding Abergavenny. What I can understand is we had issues when Abertillery Police Station was shut and sold. Officers were up in Blaenau for a good while before the hub was sorted out in Abertillery Fire Station. Now, this also caused issues with morale for our officers as well. And I'm quite shocked that we're going down the same route now. We're down the same route again with Abergavenny. Abergavenny has been sold prior to the hub being completion. I've heard as well quite a lot of things regarding what's going on with it being located in Abergavenny Fire Station. We had problems with it in Abertillery. You know, for example, the fire service didn't want our police officers accessing the gym, for example, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But why are we getting rid of our stations prior to having these hubs completed? They should be completed first before we close our stations, because it causes a lot of issues of morale for our officers. It causes a lot of issues for the residents as well. So I think we should be looking more regarding that before we jump into doing these hubs.
Well, I mean, issues of morale of police officers and their actual location is very much a matter for the chief. What I can say is I do want the very best coordination of selling of buildings to move to better facilities, more appropriate facilities for the 21st century. Sometimes it doesn't, you know, the market sometimes controls that, but please be assured that it's not a random exercise, and we do try to, from the estate side of it, try to plan these effectively. On the issues of the actual location of police officers and issues alluding to morale that you would refer to, I'll ask the chief to comment.
Yeah, fair comment. Again, it's the timing when we can get it done, and we've got to take advantage of market conditions, unfortunately. That's why we put the porta cabins there, etc. We've got a good inspector up there, Damien, who's managing those issues, and I hope it settles down. But very much aware personally, through speaking to Amanda, up with what happened up in Gwent, as to what happened at that time, and we're trying to learn that from what's happened with Damien, who's the inspector over there. Yes, it is noted, and that's a matter for me to develop, definitely.
Thanks, Chair. I'll roll a couple into one if I may. The first one, word of congratulations. I see on page 17 that Gwent is leading the competition on the Twitter and Facebook likes and followers and so on. Slightly behind on Instagram, but there we are. Just thought it was worth a mention. On local presence, just a note, every time I've seen the Caerphilly police station on Cardiff Road recently, the shutters have been down, contrary to what some of us have been told, but I'll leave that one with you. I wanted to mention the County Lines, Chair, because, again, one of the civilian officers gave a presentation mainly to raise awareness with social services staff in Caerphilly recently. It was an unusual name, which I can't quite remember, but and it's quite a frightening presentation to a lot of us. But I think it emphasised the fact that you know, we tend to think in Gwent that if there are issues, they're always in Newport. They're not always in Newport. The county lines and the spread of drugs, you know, nowhere is exempt, it appears. Even in Peters, Leafy, Monmouthshire, they're all. You know, everyone is vulnerable to the sort of initiatives that the drugs industry is taking, and I think the more awareness can be raised as to the fact that it's on your doorstep and my doorstep and everyone else's doorstep, the better, really, because people are unfortunately quite oblivious at times of the thing, and I'm sure a lot of the issues that have received high profile with knife crime, it would appear, are linked to this particular situation.
You're quite right, and look, I'm sure that the Chief may well want to comment on the actual spread of county lines. The issue of linking it with knife crime, yeah, there is a link, without doubt. We've also established, and this isn't just Gwent, this is right across the UK, there is a link between knife crime and permanent exclusions from school. So much so that the policing minister in England wants my colleagues there to make direct contact with senior education officials I had to remind, which is a bit much, having to remind a UK government minister that education is a devolved responsibility in Wales, but I had to do it. And the immediate response was, oh, well, you're exempt then. And I said, no, we're not, because we've got the problem as well. So we are getting in touch with Kirsty Williams, the Education Minister for Wales, to discuss this. And it's as much an issue in Wales as it is in England. And then undoubtedly we'll be in contact with the various local education authorities to see what joint work can be done in this regard.
Okay, just one comment from me is that the fact that the point you said, you know, it's a UK problem and it's certainly a Gwent problem. It's just not in certain areas. You know, that's something we all got to take notice of and take responsibility for. Really.
Chair, can I just say something, please, as well? I think it's important, Mr. Mann, to put these things in perspective as well. We've conducted a number of high-profile operations within the whole of the Gwent area. Operation Jewel, Operation Finch. They've arrested a number of serious and organised criminals. We've had substantial support from Operation Tarian over the last 2 years at a level unprecedented in Gwent before. But again, we'd ask people to be alert but not afraid. These things are happening. They're not happening to everyone all the time, and it's far from it. And within Wales, I think we've got an excellent serious and organised crime strategy and group, which is built on good collaboration between the forces. An excellent joint firearms unit, which I used to run myself, which actually links in on very, very serious operations across the border in England as well. And we're very good at it, and we're very proud of that. But unfortunately, what we have, I know the Commissioner has spoken on prevention and rehabilitation. Unfortunately, what happens in many of our communities, when someone is arrested for serious and organised crime, whatever age, there's always someone willing to take their place. That is a much longer term plan in relation to education, parenting, social services, local authority, everyone coming together. And that's what, frankly, we find it difficult to bring together because it is so complex. But your point is well made. These issues are happening throughout the South Wales region. But please, I would ask the public to put it in perspective. And that is the balance in relation to cybercrime as well. Many, many people get impacted upon cybercrime, but a lot of people aren't having their life savings taken off them. That is not happening. People may lose a small amount of cash. And again, take myself as this point, I probably wouldn't report it to the police because I want to get on with my daily business as well. And it always takes your own time. So it is putting in perspective. Be alert, but not afraid. And Commissioner, I don't know if I can, because I don't know if I'm able to do this, Jay. I've been in a position of Pam as well, where I've sat in the back when the previous chief's been heard and not said anything. It's very, very frustrating. So I don't know if Pam is allowed to speak, because I know she's had a huge amount of involvement in the serious and organised crime operations. I know, because I sat there before, and it is frustrating. So I just want to, because she's personally involved in a lot of the success in the serious and organised crime operations we've had.
Thank you, Chief. Just to reassure you, really, that there is a whole array of activity ongoing all of the time in Gwent in terms of reactive and proactive investigations around serious organised crime. Picking up your points previously around how we communicate some of that. Because, yes, early intervention and prevention is really important, but actually locking people up for serious or unorganised crime is a key role for law enforcement. So we are communicating that. You would have seen in the local press over the last 2 to 3 weeks many good investigations, arrests and convictions for serious organised crime, and I'm really proud of the work that Gwent Police is currently doing. What I would ask is, if the reality is that a lot of this is happening, but people don't actually report information and intelligence to us. So it's sometimes easy to say what's happening, why is it happening? Many people and many of your constituents know what's happening in their communities. And, you know, what I would ask is your advocates to make sure that if you do know what's going on, that we get the intelligence and not just the conversations after the charge and conviction.
Could I just very quickly add, because you raised particularly knife crime, one of the issues. I think it's fair to say, just to calm things down in this regard in Gwent, we're next to bottom of the league in terms of knife crime, but which I mean is good. Yeah, we're not at the top in terms of incidents. So it's a worrying trend. It is unfortunately a growing trend, but I don't want people to be alarmed. We're nothing like Manchester or Liverpool or anything like that. And the only other point, a little bit baffled, Chief, are you saying that the Joint Firearms Unit has become excellent since you were there, or?
Yeah, take on board what you said about the getting information from the community. Obviously, that needs officers, maybe CSOs, to be there and relate to the community. And certainly in my local area, there was an excellent person doing this for a number of years. Some of these officers now seem to have been sucked more into almost like squad work, where the half dozen go out and either book cars, not for much longer, but they do various other things rather than relating to the local population and getting to know the local population. Unless people know people, they will not give information. And I think maybe that has been lost a little bit in the last couple of years. So it's possibly worth having a look at that.
Jay, going back to what was just said about Facebook and Twitter, mind you, not as good as what the dog section do. Nowhere near. Right, going to 4.1, regarding the antisocial behaviour coordinated update. What I was wondering, if we could have an update regarding where I brought up, maybe even 2 years ago, 18 months ago, it was regarding the issues of CCTV in Blaenau Gwent Council. You know, I've been informed that you've agreed to pay 50% of the costs of the CCTV for where we were going to be upgrading it. I wonder if you can give us an update regarding that. I thought it might have been in your update here.
Right. I'll bring in both Larry and Sean here, if I may. This is quite an important issue because it's developed a little further. As a result of the quest from Blaenau Gwent and the discussions that we had to do quite a bit of work to make sure that we wouldn't be accused of favouritism for Blaenau Gwent over the other four local authorities in terms of providing funding for CCTV. We did that work, and whilst I felt assured that we'd only be at the very least helping them to come up to the same level as the other four, not a better system, further work, particularly with the Shared Resource Services, SRS, revealed that actually, even though it might cost a bit more money, we could go further in terms of providing the very best tool for police officers. And that's to ensure that there are indeed the right types of infrastructure installed in Blaenau Gwent, which is more or less the same already in the other local authorities, and that and my understanding is that is now, and this was reported at the G10 earlier this week, and that is now accepted, and that actually Blaenau Gwent will be paying for the installation of the cameras, but it will be ourselves that will be paying for all the ongoing costs and the cloud installation, so that right across Gwent, police officers can now access through handheld devices real-time information to enable them to attend to events. I think I'm technically right in what I'm saying here. But Sean, Larry, if you want to comment. Right, okay, this was reported at the G10. I wasn't there personally, but that is the situation now. So the whole of Gwent is going to benefit as a result. But it was because of the instigation from Blaenau Gwent that led to this.
That's good news. So just to go back on that, PCC is going to be paying the ongoing running costs, is it, of the...
Yeah, so the PCC's office will fund the hosted solution. So the images will be hosted on a system that will be funded by the Commissioner's office, but access will be by both police and the local authorities.
So thank you ever so much for listening.
Yes, just about the CCTV setup system. Within Monmouthshire, four towns subscribe to the CCTV run by SRS in Blanavon. How will that match up with what you've got in Newport, which is also directly to the Newport system is directly to the control centre? How will Blaenau Gwent and the others fit in the old Gwent CCTV?
Probably best if we give you a brief. This is a very technical point, how that would work. I'm not sure if I'm well equipped to answer that, but can we sort that out for you later on?
All right, okay.
Yeah.
I think we've covered that very well. So if we now move on to item 6, which is pages 19 to 24, update on the Police and Crime Panel complaints reform.
Okay, thank you. I reported, I think, around about 2 years ago about the changes that were brought in by the Police and Crime Act 2017. And at that time, we had thought that by now the complaints reform would have happened. But you'll see from the paper that due to delays in the legislative process for the secondary legislation and regulations, it still hasn't been implemented. But we thought it was timely just to bring it to you because when it does actually go through Parliament, we'll be given 6 months' notice of implementation. And at that point, the complaint system will change and responsibilities move from Chief Constables to Commissioners. So I just have set out the 3 models in the paper. The first one, which will be compulsory for all Commissioners' offices, is to take on responsibility for what are now called appeals, but will be called reviews of complaints. So the intention is in Wales is that we will appoint 2 complaints reviewers between 3 of the PCC's offices, and they will take responsibility for dealing with any appeals made by members of the public in relation to police complaints, and they will review those complaints to see if they've been dealt with in a reasonable and proportionate manner. So that's something that the new regulations will bring in. At the moment, it's sort of far more complex, but the only requirement will be, rather than to reinvestigate any complaint, but just to look at the detail of it to see if the police force has dealt with it in a reasonable, proportionate way. So that's Model 1. Model 2 adds an additional element where the PCC's office would be responsible for all of the initial contact in relation to the complaint. So complaints would come in via the PCC's office and also be responsible for low-level resolution. That's very similar to the public response unit we have in our office at the moment, which we've reported to you previously. They deal with a lot of the low-level issues. When it was introduced, I think there was a capacity issue within the professional standards department, so it was a way of assisting, and rather than a formal complaints process being followed if the member of the public didn't want that, we just made sure they had an answer quickly, that if they were looking for an apology, for example, that was done in a really timely manner. And those type of things were sort of set to one side so that the professional standards department could concentrate far more on the formal complaints under the Police Reform Act. So the third model is that relates to having all contact, so the Commissioner's office having all contact with the complainant, but an investigation would always still be done by a police force because it's only police officers who can do those investigations. As I've said, not many, maybe only 2 commissioners intend to go down the Model 3 route, and the vast majority will go through the Model 1 or Model 2. A decision is yet to be made for us in relation to Model 1 or 2, but there's a piece of work that the Deputy Chief Constable has offered that her team can do for us, is to do some business modelling about those options, numbers, sort of time that will be taken, and we'll sort of layer on top of that some of the more qualitative information that we have around the public's confidence, really, in how complaints are dealt with. Part of the reason for the change in legislation in the first place was a sort of a perception, perhaps, that the police were investigating their own complaints and how appropriate that was. and they sort of preferred the option of things being a bit more independent and with PCCs taking things on. I mean, we've said in our discussions, we have absolute confidence in the independence of the Professional Standards Department in looking at complaints, so that would never really be an issue for us in Gwent. It would purely be about the other advantages and disadvantages of going for the different models. So that's the decision that's going to be made next. We're still waiting for it to go through Parliament. I say when it does, there'll be 6 months' notice of putting a new system in place. We know whichever option that we go for, there'll probably be a requirement for an uplift of staff. The only decision will be whether our staff sit with the Commissioner's office or with the police. So that's part of the option as well. We also just want to make sure, as the regulations and the new IOPC statutory guidance is developed, that people don't think now that commissioners have a review responsibility, that they get an additional appeal responsibility to yourselves, because obviously that could be the case. So it's one of the things that's apparently going to be clarified in the guidance that sits alongside the new regulations. So really it's just sort of update you that that's where we are. We're told that it could happen in the summer. But from a national perspective, we've advised if it's any later than the summer, with a 6-month lead-in for implementation, we would rather it waited until after the Police and Crime Commissioner elections next year, because bringing in a new system where in some areas there could potentially be a new commissioner who prefers a different system is not helpful to anyone, including the public. So that's just sort of where we are at the moment, and I propose that I continue to update you as we go along.
It's going to take a lot of forward planning, really, isn't it? Yeah, you know, that's a bit of an understatement, really, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Regarding the models, what assurances are in place to ensure that the complainant is going to be kept informed of the progress of the complaint if the PCC do not take forward Model 3 route?
From my perspective, then that falls back to our monitoring responsibility of the police force. So the systems will need to be in place either way. So it's whether or not we are responsible for it ourselves or the Commissioner holds the Chief to account for that. So the system should be there and the requirement is there either way. It's just whether or not we're actually doing that piece of work ourselves or making sure that somebody else does.
Would it be easier if the PCC office were doing it all themselves and just left the investigations to the police regarding the complaint? Would it be easier, say, that you know, instead of like the police then, that you having to check that the police have undertaken the work in ensuring that the complainant's kept up to date? Would it be a better flow?
I think that's part of the business modelling, but I would also say that because the investigation is being done by the police, the flow might actually become more complicated if we're required to do the updates as well, because that's putting us as another person always in the middle of that information. So from our perspective, I think that would be one of the things that, you know, there will be people on the plus side which might say they have more confidence in the independence of getting the updates directly from the Commissioner's office, but we would only be getting that information from the police force anyway.
Tony and then Jill.
Yeah, just one brief question. You state on personnel considerations it's likely to need to take on other members of staff, depending on the model which you choose. It does, and also the fact that it might become the Chief Constable's responsibility, basically, or the PCC. In your models, it doesn't seem to me to give an indication of which model would incur the Chief Constable taking responsibility or the PCC taking responsibility.
Models 2 and 3 would require the Police and Crime Commissioner's office to have the additional staff, and Model 1 would certainly, but Model 1, either way, we would be looking at the joint role with the other PCCs in Wales in relation to the review. So that would be the distinction of ours. Yeah.
Thanks. Really interesting to see that you're going to look at the reviewers working across the PCCs. I suppose at least then that gives you some ability to look at what's going on in other areas, learn from other areas, and actually identify where any issues are. And obviously, yeah, spread the cost because you want that person to be fully utilised, not waiting for peaks and troughs necessarily of complaints. Just as an idea, really, how many complaints would you sort of be looking at? Just a ballpark figure. Any idea roughly what that would be? talking sort of, are they in their 50s or are they in a couple of hundred? Because obviously a complaint can vary from somebody that's not happy just putting in a general whinge, which I guess wouldn't take a huge amount of time, but you've still got the correspondence and the ongoing. So I was just curious, are we talking hundreds? Is it just for a general feel, really?
It is potentially. I think one of the issues which is difficult to anticipate is a lot of people are talking about there being an increase as a result of this change. So it could go up. So from the perspective of our office, for example, the low-level ones that we deal with, it might be 40 a month, but I would say that you're probably dealing with a couple of hundred more from the police force side. And then often, I think you'll see from the performance report, then there can be a lot of allegations within one complaint as well. So that's another sort of complication. And even when we've been trying to do the work to see how many complaints reviewers we need, and we've asked heads of professional standards how long it takes them at the moment to do a review, and the answer is anything from 3 hours to 3 days. You know, so it's quite difficult to quantify, but it is something that we're doing on an ongoing basis, because we last did it about 12 months ago when we were going to go ahead with a pilot, and we thought that it was going to be implemented sooner rather than later, but we've decided to do that again on an all-Wales basis to make sure that our numbers are right for us to make the decision now.
We actually there was Stephen Smith from the IOPC came to our Network and Development Day earlier in the week, and we certainly had no feeling that this was going to be any more imminent than you do. It clearly was something that was a move in. As Darren was there as a representative and did an amazing finance presentation. I will pass that on. But, you know, he heard firsthand as well that there just seems to be very little... there's no end date for this at the moment. It's still something that's developing. And I think, you know, taking on your point about who does the review, does the PCC take it all on? I guess it's very difficult then, because if a police officer is feeding back on an allegation or an issue, you don't almost want to muddy the waters by adding somebody who maybe isn't a police professional into that. It's interpretation. It's very difficult. So it is going to be a difficult decision to make about the best way to go forward, and something which you're going to learn from as it develops, I guess. Thanks very much.
Okay, I think we've dealt with that. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent Scrutiny and Performance Framework, pages 25 to 80.
Thank you very much, Chair. By way of introduction to this, I just want to make a few remarks. You will see from the size of the information and the matrix and the report before you that there's a lot of work gone into this, and that it builds on what we presented to you last December. The reason in the main why the Chief and the Deputy Chief are here as well are to deal with any questions that there may be from their side in terms of the information provided for this plan. What is clear is that, and I've alluded to this already, and it's linked certainly in terms of the draft new or updated plan, is that the information here within the framework is not yet complete. We'll acknowledge that straight away. There is more to be done, and that's why in the covering page I pointed out that I will be implementing an action plan. Together with Gwent Police and DCC Pam Kelly will be taking responsibility for the policing side of that action plan to get this completed, and it will be completed against the existing police and crime plan. We'll then look to move the plan to the priorities of the updated plan in due course. I want to pay tribute, if I may, to the work of Joe Robinson, who's been instrumental in putting this together, and will deal with a lot of the questions around its structure. Also want to thank your Vice Chair, Jill Howells, for the support and help that she's given to Joe in terms of the production of a document that is useful for the committee. I'm very keen that we get this right and we move on. I don't want to in any way misguide you or give you any false impression, but this is taking up a lot of officers' time. And I want us to move to a position where we've got it right, that it's a document that is useful, gives you the reassurance that you need about the scrutiny arrangements, together with obviously the meetings that I have with the Chief and other bodies that members of my team attend with Gwent Police. I want to achieve that so that we can then refocus a lot of our work back on our main role, which I see as providing the service to the people of Gwent, which is very much a partnership approach, and building up the type of issues and developing the type of issues that I refer to regularly within the update plan. I'm very keen that we get it right. If anyone was to ask me what my main priorities here in terms of both the scrutiny and support of Gwent Police, I would say I want to have strong evidence to show that people are confident that the police in Gwent are good, that the people feel safe within the resources that we have, that we do more to reduce repeat offenders within Gwent, that we can recruit more officers to strengthen neighbourhood policing teams. And that's very much linked to the issue where we talked about the size earlier of the team that's working on the cyber issues. Whilst the actual allocation of officers and the deployment of officers is, of course, a matter for the Chief Constable, I want to make sure that they have sufficient resources to enable that to happen. I've also made it clear within the issues of equality that I want to see a position where we're recruiting more officers or student officers from our financially disadvantaged communities, and those are matters that I'll be looking to see how we can actually measure this going forward. And I suppose the biggest single issue is not something that Gwent Police alone can do, and this is part of my national work, and to a lesser extent with the Welsh Government, in terms of the level of money and resources that I'm able to get from the Home Office and indeed from the people of Gwent through the precept to pay for what we need to do. That is probably my biggest single focus in terms of the foreseeable future, because without that, of course, we can't achieve all that much. I'll pause there, Chair. Could I ask my colleague Jo Robinson if there's more she'd like to say now by way of introduction, and then we'll take questions and comments.
I don't think there is anything at this point. I'd rather, if there were questions, to respond to those questions, if that's okay.
Can I just say, before we ask the questions, there was a programme this morning on the radio, BBC Wales, and it was all about funding from the Home Office, and you know, there was, you can imagine what the Home Office was saying, and etc. So, you know, it's a continuous battle for funding, isn't it, in all sorts of ways, really. But there we go. Okay.
Going to page 29. The chart that's on there regarding the crime types, I notice we haven't got cybercrime actually on the chart. And also, how is domestic abuse categorised on this chart? As for example, on page 5, it states that 668 children were witnessed or experienced domestic abuse in January. So how is that categorised on this? I know domestic abuse can come in many different forms, but like we haven't even got cybercrime on there. So it does concern me that, you know, we're supposed to be giving recorded volumes of crime, but cybercrime isn't even mentioned on there.
First or who's coming first? Me first? Okay. I think if I could to answer the question about the domestic abuse crimes first, because if you look on the following page, which is page 30, then you do have the domestic abuse crime types. So you wouldn't see it in the main page, the page in 29, but you will see it on the following page. That is the breakdown of domestic abuse within crime type. So there is no domestic abuse crime type as such. So all of those, we will see, you can see on that page across all of those crime types where there is domestic abuse. So that would have been where there is a domestic abuse flag. There's an acknowledgement that that is relating to domestic abuse itself. So that's how we've chosen to, or how the Gwent Police reported the domestic abuse crimes to us. And that's what, and that would be what we would be looking for cybercrime in the future. And that's what I was indicating around the performance measures, is that at the moment we know that, you know, as per the report earlier, that we have national reports and we know that cybercrime is increasing. We need to work with Gwent Police to have that lens on cybercrime as we do here around domestic abuse. So we don't have it at the moment, but that is something that we would look to commit to. We can say areas where we know cybercrime affects things, and that's already been indicated today around kind of sexting and fraud and all of those kind of things, but we would like to have that information presented in this way in the future. Thank you.
Can I come back on that? The only thing I will say, you put this report together, this graph, and it's showing crime types, and you know all of the theft, bicycle theft and all that. It's not really giving then a true impression of it with cyber crimes missed off there. So it's basically saying, right, in Gwent, in 2018, 2019, we only had 14,376 crimes, which is not accurate, because like cyber crimes missed off there. We need something that reflects the actual amount of crime. You know, if items are being missed off there, how can this be put public when it's not given a true recognition of the actual crimes that have been committed in our borough?
Okay, if I can come in, I think your point is really valid in terms of how we put the schedule together. Cybercrime, I think we've already covered. I think it needs to be in more detail in the next report, and we'll certainly have that for the panel. I think it's really important around the domestic abuse comment that you've made, that we add some context here, because violence with injury, when you look at a 13.1% increase, and then violence without injury, a 16.2% increase. I understand that is really alarming when we see that. When you look at the domestic abuse work that we've been doing to try and encourage people to report crime, out of those numbers, we're actually 57% of that violent crime is domestic related. So we have about 550 domestic crimes a month. So take exactly what you're saying. I think it's about context and that additionality in terms of cybercrime.
Sorry.
Thank you on that.
Yeah, just to clarify, so I think we're trying to say there would never be a cybercrime line on that table, because elements of those other crimes would be cyber dependent or cyber enabled. So I think that's the bit that we need to pull out of that information and provide you in future.
But like, for example, when we had the presentation, it was said about business was attacked via the cyber, and you know that was a crime just basically solely around cyber, because they were stopped from going into their iCloud. They were the information, you know, they couldn't access their iCloud. So there was no other physical element, that was all cyber. So shouldn't there still be a cyber element on there when a crime is actually 100% cyber then?
Well, when we say 100%, I mean, the crime there was alleged blackmail and theft,
yeah.
But...
I totally take your point. Those are the true crime figures for Q3. Cyber is not a crime category. That's what we're saying. So cyber isn't a crime category. Am I correct in saying that? It's not. But it's, as was in the presentation, it can be cyber enabled. So if you've got a cyber enabled crime, which is a theft, as Mrs. Howell said earlier, I would regard that as a theft of her money. It is cyber enabled. So on our command and control system, it will have a cyber element on it. What we can do in the future, although as has been said earlier, this takes people away from policing and interrogation of systems just to drag out data. That's what it does. But there is a cyber element to a significant amount of those. I do question some of the figures bandied about. 50% of crime is cybercrime. I don't know who knows that, because no data is ever presented to me. 40, 60, could be. We estimate that is the case. but 14,000 is 376 is the level. Multiply that by 4, we're on about 64,000 a year. When I first came to the force, we're on 35,000. So it's gone up 30,000. Just before I came to the force, we had 1,450 police officers. We're now under the impression that we've gone up massively. We've gone up from the lowest level we've ever been. We were 1,179. We're now 1,330. So whereby the demand has nearly doubled, the number of officers has gone down by 120. That is the reality of it. Sarah Thornton makes comments as the outgoing MPCC Chief Constable today on the media in The Guardian. She states exactly that. There is the perception that we've got a massive increase in numbers. We haven't since 2010. We've still got a decrease. Where demand is going up. Totally take your point. Cyber isn't on there, but we can have an element, but there is no crime category cyber crime. That's what I said. Thank you.
It's very interesting that you refer to your team commissioner as being able to refocus on their main work once this project is complete. I have to say, I had full consideration been given at the time at which you created the plan about how you were going to deliver and demonstrate this, then this work could have been avoided. You would have been aware of the progress along your journey, and so would we as a panel. It's very frustrating to sit here as a panel member and hear from your very proud officers about all the good work that is going on. You know, that work is happening. This information is being collected. It's not just about the basic bits of information about the numbers of crime and the incidents. That there's incredible projects going on. There's a lot of good work going on. And, you know, you need that information to be able to know that you as a commissioner are going down the road which you've set up in your plan. You need to know that to hold the Chief Constable account to make sure he's delivering in line with your plan. And we as a panel need to know that as well. It's been not an issue to devote the time, because I genuinely, as much as I can be, I would say a critical friend, you probably wouldn't, as much as I can be critical about this, I also want to see this work. I am keen to see this developed and going in the right direction. I'm happy to spend the time with Joe, and it's been very interesting over the last couple of weeks, and we've kept in touch. We're now arranging to meet with Mark Budden, who's now taken this over, I understand, along with the DCC. And I'm happy to do that, but I'm only happy to do that as long as we are going to take this forward and deliver something that's useful. My intention isn't that we have something that's suitable for a panel. It's something that works for everybody, that's based on your core plan and the operational plan that exists. As long as the intention is that we will deliver on that, then I will happily meet with Mark and progress and put my time into that. But it's having the assurance that there is the will and the commitment to take this forward, and it's seen as a valuable piece of work.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I was minimising in any way the importance of this. That's not what I meant. But I am conscious that of my team members' time and the overall impact that this is having. I agree with you absolutely. Look, it's not just a question of the convenience of the panel. Of course it isn't. A tool like this would be very useful for me as well. Now, I've got no doubt about the quality of the work that Gwent Police are doing, and I achieve that satisfaction, and maybe this will explain the point I'm trying to make, through a series of face-to-face meetings, some of which are held in public, such as the Strategy and Performance Board, where we have some lengthy agendas and we go through a range of issues and receive answers. This could be satisfactory or not, and if they're not satisfactory, then further action comes from it. So I am confident, and there's a range of other boards, strategy boards, implementation boards that members of my team attend. So I've got a good feel for what's happening within Gwent Police. What I meant by my comments was that I do appreciate that unless we have a document like this, it is difficult for panel members to have that sort of knowledge that I have because of my day-to-day work. I appreciate that very, very much. So I am very keen to get this right. It will be a useful tool for us in our own right as well. So I'll give you 100% my commitment to get it right and then to maintain it. And the issue of maintaining it will be less in terms of effort than the actual construction of an achievable document. And one of the issues, well, I'll ask it now, that you might want to consider but I was going to leave it towards the end, is it's a substantial document now. This reflects everything up to Q3. At the end of Q4, we'll have a final year when we come to write the final year-end document for the whole of the 12 months. But whether you want this level of detail at each meeting, or whether you want some form of summary document that provides you perhaps with a RAG rating and some key points for the purpose of discussion, that'll be a matter for yourselves to give us guidance on. But I want to make it absolutely clear, this is important to me. I want to get it right. I want you to feel confident that it's right, and that we really do value the input and support that the panel gives us, usually in the form of, and I do regard you as a critical friend, Jill, and you know, we find that help very, very useful, because the expertise that you have and the understanding of our work and that of the panel.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, wrong page. I'll be there in a minute. Yeah, the on page 56, it's a bit worrying when it says no dated information, no baseline. I assume it's to do with the community agreeing, etc., with substance issues. I'm assuming that excuse me. I'm assuming that information is being worked on, and it will be.
Sorry, what you talking about? 3.5?
3.5. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, yes, indeed it is. It is, and that's why it's red, and that is one of the gaps that we have to complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Again on page 66.
Sorry. Oh no. Okay. Yeah. No. I thought the deputy wanted to come in, but she doesn't. Yeah.
On page 66, 5.5, I read on the right-hand column that 85% of deployment is the recommended level, and as we can see there, that 5 areas have over 90%. In fact, only one, I think, comes within the 85% as it stands here. I'm assuming that this will change when the recruitment is further ahead and people are being deployed, but I thought maybe that assurance would be useful.
Or 45?
669.
Oh, 69.
Yeah, 45 and 69.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we are actually remodelling our operating model as we speak. So this is all about work, our ability to respond, workloads of officers, the capacity, and we're constantly remodelling that based on demand. And also things such as double crewing. So for me, for example, I think officers going out on their own at night, when you look at some of our increase in violence, is unacceptable. But during the day, it's really important that we single crew in the majority of areas. So building that into our operating model allows us to get to places quicker and hopefully reduce workloads as well. So we have basically a computer system which looks at demand and modelling in order for us to review that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was going to raise some of the points that Jill has raised, but I was pleased to hear the Commissioner feels that he does have the information to be assured that what needs to be done is being done. But the whole idea of this is that, and I think maybe future reports may just highlight the areas that you feel needs attention, rather than drowning people with lots and lots of paper. Where I mean, it's nice to see the green areas and where things are being done well, but obviously we need to concentrate on where things need improving, and get assurance on that, really.
Yeah, Mr. Mann, fair point. A big thank you for bringing that on page 69. I would put the question back to you, really. We're currently 1279 officers. We're going to go up probably 51 officers. Spread 51 officers across our 10 policing areas. I don't think that percentage is going to come down a lot. Our officers are dealing with huge demand. They're still going to be extremely busy, especially as demand increases. That is not going to go drop down a huge amount. You're going to still see very, very busy police officers who are running hot in this force for a significant period of time. And that is going to stay the same in the future with the small increase in officers we've had. Although substantial with the level we've gone towards, so our officers are going to continue to be busy. I think it's fair to make that point. And if I can just correct myself as well in relation, because I realise this is live streamed, I said 64,000 crimes a year. I think 4 times 14, 56,000. Careful of what goes out in the media, of course. Okay, thank you.
Well, the Chief is on stage. I was intrigued with the different percentages in Newport. I assume that people would be transferred maybe from one bit to another to relieve pressures, but I don't know. It's obviously more complicated than that.
No, not at all. Newport, as I've said before, Newport Local Authority is the busiest police and local authority we have, without a doubt, because it contains Newport East, Newport West, and Newport City Centre. Volumes of calls-wise, Newport City Centre, although it gets significant media attention, is probably the quietest in relation to calls. Newport East and West are much busier. Officers are transferred and moved about those three areas as they are around the force, but these calls will then be allocated and divided up in percentage-wise in relation to that area, so that's how the figures are. But it is clear officers in Newport East and West are much busier in the volume of calls. But then again, officers and staff within Newport City Centre may on occasions deal with a huge volume of people, nighttime economy, etc., and you need more officers to actually cope and calm the situation where there may not be a call. And that is recognised.
Thank you, Chief.
Just one thing I wanted. I can't see anything in here about the apprenticeships, which really, I suppose, that comes under the Chief Constable. But what I was going to go on to is there's been concern about getting finance for that, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. The apprenticeship levy?
Yeah.
Ah, right. Well, yes, it's certainly both of us. Certainly a matter for the Commissioner in terms of the money. I think it's fair to say we are making progress in terms of identifying where that money is. We had a very successful, it was the second meeting of the Policing Partnership Board with the Welsh Government under the chair of the First Minister, and this issue was raised. The response, which I fully anticipated and I can't argue with, is of course that formally this is a matter for the Home Office, as policing is a reserved service, and that money has not been sent to the Welsh Government, which is responsible otherwise for training of people in general in Wales, but not reserved services. We're hopeful that we'll get this resolved. We're certainly looking to the current Secretary of State for Wales to help us in this regard around the Cabinet table, notwithstanding all the issues that they've got to consider right now. But nevertheless, we are making progress. We have the money to enable us to start at least year one. We've had some one-off funding from the Welsh Government to support us, as we have from the Home Office, so we're able to make progress in terms of the higher education element of the graduate apprenticeship scheme. And we've recently just inducted 15 student officers at the first round, but maybe the Chief wants to comment further.
Yes, a new way of training. We've been through it before. The finance, of course, needs to be there. The Commissioner's worked hard. I think colleagues as Chief Constables throughout Wales and Commissioners have worked hard with Home Office and Welsh Government, and it remains to be seen what happens next year. I think the perception is out there as well. You have to have a degree to join the police. That's not the case at all. I speak to many people I know. It's a real opportunity for some people. If you join the police now and you haven't got a degree, can't afford to go to university, or don't think you can achieve in a particular way, this will allow you to become a police officer and attain a certain level of academic achievement. So we hope in our more deprived areas it will assist people to gain a degree and a qualification whilst policing as well. It's a real good opportunity, and Gwent Police has, with a number of other forces in collaboration with South Wales, have moved this forward very quickly.
Thanks for that, Chief. If we now move on to... Go on.
Thank you, Chair. If I could take you to page 51, 3.2, where with the new police reviewing its Facebook presence, the priorities is now being run in Blaenau Gwent. Would it be possible to have an update on that, please?
Which page did you say, sorry?
Page 51, 3.2.
All right, okay. Well, yes, I wanted to ask Rodriguez, my communications guru.
Hi, this part of the report is about local priority settings. The force is currently looking at a way of setting local priorities away from using the Your Voice survey, which it has in the past. So a trial has recently been done via social media to ask people in Blaenau Gwent to help set local ward priorities. This is part of a move towards locally identified solutions and practices, which is about getting more members of the public, partners, key stakeholders involved in tackling issues within any given area.
Okay, if we now move on to number 9, which is the agenda item 9, forward work programme 81 to 82.
There's agenda item 8. Chair.
Ah, right, I jumped that. Yeah.
Well,
Agenda 8, Gwent Police and Crime Plan update to follow.
I can understand why, because in many ways we have alluded to it already. There's not much for more to say, but I do want to make a few comments. One just final thing that I wanted to add about the work on the performance report. We actually did quite a bit of work, and I spoke to a lot of my colleagues across England and Wales about the type of information that they put together on performance report, whether to share it with a panel or not. And it's very much a mixed picture. There's a few that do what we're striving to do, and there's a number that don't do anything like it. And it's interesting that it seems to me, again, this is anecdotal, I haven't got any scientific basis for it, that those PCCs who provide panels with this type of information have the better relationship than the ones that don't. And I think that's very important, because I think it helps to build trust. We have our arguments from time to time, we'll have our differences, but I feel that, you know, you're always on the supportive side more than the challenge side, although there's no contradiction, but you are supportive of the work that we do there, and that's one reason why I want to get it right. Moving on to the new plan, what we've given out today, it's in draft form. There are still items to be completed. It does certainly, with regard in terms of comparison with the existing plan, it does have the strands and the threads of serious and organised crime running through it in a much stronger way than the existing plan. And again, I must pay tribute to Joe Robinson, who you can see, you can judge the amount of work that Joe Robinson has been doing, because she, together with her colleagues like Rodri, has been putting this together. It's also different in a significant way. One thing that I've learnt from the first plan that we put in, or the current plan, is that, first of all, we haven't changed the priorities. I think that's very important. It's an updating on the priorities. The 5 priorities remain the same. That's important. But the way in which we've summarised the main outcomes that we're looking for, that has altered, and you'll see that they're smaller in number, they're a little bit broader, but that there will also be a separate document which we're working on, which will actually show the particular types of outcomes that will help us to assess whether or not the particular priorities are being achieved. And that's important, because One of the criticisms, quite rightly, of the current plan is that many of the issues in there, as we will assess this by, are difficult. They're a little bit contentious, a little bit vague as to what the evidence might be. So we will have the actual, if you like, anyone who's familiar with competency-based training will know that there's usually the standards, the occupational standards, and then as a separate document, the evidence requirements that enable a judgment to be made. So we are separating the documents quite deliberately so that, first of all, with the changing natures of crime, we won't have to rewrite the whole plan, but we can rewrite the evidence requirements, the actual issues out there, and that will be a much simpler way of progressing and enable us to make sure that what we're assessing is not only easily accessible with good evidence, strong evidence, but is also relevant and up to date with current policing needs based on the changing nature of crime. So it's quite a shift in the way in which we intend to work. At this stage, as I said, it's draft. We realise you've just had it now, so some of you may be able to scan through it. What we would welcome over the next period is comments, observations that panel members may have, which we will look to see if we can feed in to the final document prior to publication. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yeah, looking at the priorities and crime prevention in the front there, which is probably the most important thing to you and to everyone else really, is that specifically, you know, with your pressures with everything else and dealing with all these other things, crime prevention at one time used to be people used to go out and give a lot of advice and things like that. Sometimes I wonder if insurance companies and people like that ought to be sort of involved in giving all sorts of advice. But crime prevention really is getting to people and warning them of certain implications. It's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it, really? But sometimes if it comes from police officers, then it has more effect than others. But
Absolutely, Chair, and that's why in the first bullet point, proactive prevention and partnership working, and there's absolutely no reason why that can't include the private sector. We know, going back to cyber, there is a lot of support from financial institutions, because very often they're the ones that are targeted and have to pay out a lot of money, and they will invest and join with us in terms of providing education and preventative mechanisms. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the more we can get, the more we are more interested in preventing crime than arresting people for carrying out the crime. I think that's a fair thing to say. And that is going to be a key, if not the main focus going forward, even though the nature of those crimes that we're trying to prevent may change.
Yeah, Commissioner, if you want to come up, obviously, Mr. Guy, as you will know yourself in your role as police officer before, it's a basic duty of any police officer, any police staff member. Mr. Mann mentioned about the ability of PCSOs and neighbourhood teams to go out there. We would expect every single member, including myself, to be able to give crime prevention advice. We have got various departments who specialise in certain things. For example, public protection units who will give advice in relation to that. Criminal investigation department in relation to serious and organised crime. But the core duty I regard, and one of the core duties I have, is to give crime prevention advice to assistance any specific time. It is the way of policing now. The people are multifunctional, and that is the expectation. I can assure you, in the new police education qualification framework built into the curriculum will be a significant amount about crime prevention. And as was covered earlier, our officers and staff receive training in relation to crime prevention, cybercrime, and that may be as simple as change your password, have a complex password, keep different passwords, don't show your screen to others, don't give your details. So we think we've moved on, although we do agree as well, it's the detail for every organisation to do that, not just us.
Oh, go on.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, as you said, Commissioner, we haven't had exactly a long time to be able to go through it in any sort of detail. One thing I couldn't help noticing, it's on the front page now, is that we appear to have officers with white hats on. I can't remember when I saw that, so I assume I assume there's a certain amount of library pictures in here. But on a more serious note, I assume this is meant to be accessible to people who have difficulty in sort of reading small print. Now, quite honestly, if you publish it in this form, you are excluding quite a few people from actually reading. Now, I appreciate that there's a desire to get lots and lots of stuff in. If you definitely need all the stuff in you've got, maybe you'll need to consider making it a longer document so you can actually increase the print size. It is not acceptable to put something out with this print size.
It's a very fair point.
Yeah. The dummy that you're seeing is shrunk, just so you can see it all easier, and so we weren't using so much paper to print it out. All the font is at 12 point, and it's in Arial and Gill Sans, so it meets all the accessibility requirements when it gets printed. And when the PDF goes up on channels, it will be the same thing then. So it's just the physical copy you've got that is smaller. It's not the actual the finished product.
Could I just on the what page are we talking about? It's the one. It's still on the crime prevention, but not relating to that. It's page 6, right? And there's a mention there about Her Majesty's Inspector Constabulary, HMIC. At one time, you used to get those sort of coming along and inspecting you nearly every other month, really. You get into a more reasonable situation there?
Yes, it often feels as if they still do. On that point, the Chief may well want to comment on that. I mean, no, that's a slight exaggeration, but Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and now Fire and Rescue Services, even though that bit doesn't apply in Wales, it's still nevertheless their title. They're now recognising formally the importance in terms of local priorities of the police and crime plan. Up until this point, they have no remit in terms of the police and crime plan and didn't really take it into account when they inspect the effectiveness of police forces. The Chief and the Deputy will be aware, of course, the new force management statements are now being introduced as a way of, I think it's self-awareness and it's self-assessment, I beg your pardon. So I'm very keen that all our various systems, even if they're for different purposes, can coincide as far as possible to reduce the volume of inspections and checks. Not to take away with the quality, but to actually reduce the volume, because they are very time-consuming. You're quite right when you raise it. If schools were inspected as much as police, I don't know, we'd probably have a rebellion, and there'd be not much teaching done. But there we are. But I know that the Chief may want to comment as well.
Yes, Mr. Guy, just so you know, this year we've already been inspected on crime data integrity, or the inspection results were released. We inspected a short time ago on child protection. We've been inspected on domestic abuse. So just for you to be reassured, we are inspected regularly in relation to various aspects of our business. We embrace that because of the fact that it's a free peer review for us, with experts coming in from across the country. It's very, very time consuming, but we do gain things from it, especially in relation to domestic abuse, because we're never complacent about that. We're preparing now for the Peel inspection, which is the main inspection in the force. That'll take place in July. So we are regularly inspected, and it's good to have an independent view on the amount of times you get inspected given by the Commissioner, which I'm sure is much more relevant than mine, actually being inspected myself. So thank you.
The Chief has covered most of my points, but not to underestimate the impact that has on our resources. So since the hate crime inspection, child abuse, domestic abuse, prevent, anti-corruption, and soon a full inspection in July, couple that with the fact that we have to draft a force management statement. The force management statement covers our demand, which is some of the things that Mr Mann has just mentioned, along with a whole host of other issues, our resources and ability to meet that demand, and of course our budget, along with what our plans are for the next 3 to 5 years, but in detail about the next 12 months. And actually next year, HMIC will be inspecting us against our self-assessment, that force management statement, so to make sure that what our predictions are, what our concerns are, that we've actually got plans in place to meet that. So it's a whole array of work. It is fair to say that we have a really good relationship with HMIC. So it's not just them coming into the force blindly with a team of people. We work really closely with Sarah Cooper, who literally comes in a minimum of once a month, so that it's an evolving process and a peer review, as the Chief has suggested, in terms of our performance. So an awful lot of work to be able to evidence that, because obviously the public then get sight of those inspection reports, and of course they are released on the media as well.
Could I also add into that the 150 days of internal audit work that goes into the force as well on operational and financial matters? So there's an extensive regime of assurance undertaken.
Thanks, Chair. Just going back into your plan, I know page 17, you've got that typical day in the Gwent Police. Will that change when you put your final document out? Because I'm looking on it, on the bottom here, so in March 2018, estimated population is 5,133, but the current officer is 1,203, but the Chief said it was 1,279. So would that page will be updated?
Yes, yes. How was that for a short answer?
Yeah, it's like being in a Crown Court and saying yes or no, isn't it, really? Okay, I think we've dealt with that. Nobody else wants to say anything?
Just one. Commissioner mentioned comments. I don't think we had a date by when.
Sorry, I've been advised 12th of April. Oh, hang on, something else is meant to happen on 12th of April as well, isn't it?
Do you want an extension?
Yeah, only if you have a meaningful vote now. And,
Okay, we now move on to the last item, and then Lisa wants to make an announcement, some information for you after that. So we just look into the forward work plan, which is item 9, pages 81 to 82. Just quickly have a...
Thank you, Chair. Just want to highlight to members, the next meeting is on the 28th of June. We will have performance reporting on the agenda again in terms of sickness absence, the PCC update, and the Police and Crime Commissioners at Gwent draft annual report will be on the agenda. So I think there's some meaty items there for discussion.
Darren.
Yes.
Sorry, you know I don't like having not having a meeting without the speaking part for me. Is it possible? Is it possible to put? Yeah. Is it possible to put the medium-term financial projections into June if there's any significant changes from what was presented as part of the budget set? If I may.
Well said.
sorry, can I just ask? I didn't know. Do you mean instead of something else, or as an additional? Like, in addition. Okay.
Is it 3 o'clock?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say I'm very pleased with the meeting this morning. We had a lot of support for your presentation, and I think it's very fruitful. The information has come forward. I found this morning very good.
Before we close the meeting, this young lady wants to make an announcement.
Just to inform the panel, it is, this on the May the 16th to 19th, Gwent Police are holding the National Dog Trials. They haven't held it for, is it over 30 years, 40 years, something like that it is. It's a massive amount of time. And it's going to be held in Tredegar House. It's going to be an excellent day. Well, days it is. There's going to be all stalls and different things going on. And it'd be great if panel members could come down and take a look. They can meet Gwent Police's dog handlers and the dogs down there. And it is, you know, I am biased on this. They are phenomenal. They are. The work they do is absolutely outstanding. The dogs are absolutely amazing. And it's been nice for people to actually come and see. So if any of the panel members would like to pop down, it's from May the 16th to 19th down in Tredegar House. It is.
I'm doing it, so if people want to put names in a hat, I'll select if you want. Obviously, it'll be by chance. So if you want to put your names in a hat, please do. We'll see what comes out.
Chief, it is good fun because you do get, you know, the dogs do hit you down and drag you all the way across the field as well.
Can I say...
The dogs tend to say it's rough.
Can I say that'll be a note for a lot of people in their diaries, really, to be chased by a police dog in particular, grabbing hold of your arm. You can actually feel that underneath there, really,
Yeah.
even if you've got the coverage.
It still punctures your skin.
Yeah. Can I now say that the end of our meeting, the panel is closed. Thank you very much for attending. I hope, I'm sure that everyone has contributed to a high standard. It's been a real professional meeting. And the most important thing, we're here to represent all the people of Gwent, not just, just one or other localities. Thank you very much and safe journey. Thank you.